The following is a debate between Zionist collector David Matlow of Toronto, Canada, and Joshua Hoffman, the founder of Future of Jewish, around the question, who decides who gets to be a Zionist?
All right, David, first question. What do you think that Theodor Herzl would say at this very moment?
I have two separate thoughts about what he might say. Firstly, I think he would say to both sides being the Israel and its supporters, as well as Israel detractors, i.e. Palestinian supporters, he would say, where is your Herzl? Where is someone who has articulated a vision for a better future? On the Palestinian side, I see Herzl saying, you've set out to destroy something that I've envisioned. You're setting out to eliminate, destroy, kill, maim, rape, murder my people, and are not articulating a vision for a better future. It's easy, a better future for all people. It's easier to destroy than to build, to create, to envision. And Herzl envisioned a Jewish state, and not exclusively a Jewish state, but a place where the Jewish people could be free and safe, and to do it in a way that was in the best interests of everyone, the way he envisioned it. And I look to the Palestinian supporters and say, where is your Herzl, who's articulated a vision that's different than simply destruction and elimination? On the Israeli side, of the Israeli supporter side, he would ask the same thing, I believe. Where is the vision that you've articulated, which is consistent with what I, Herzl, envisioned? A place where everyone is free to actualize their lives as best they can in a peaceful way, and something that's in the best interest of everyone. And so Herzl's vision, articulated in his book Old New Land, Alt Neuland, was a utopian society where the Jewish state, he called it the New Society, would benefit the Jewish people and everyone else. And where is your vision, Israel, for that? It's not simply about eliminating the Hamas and the terrorists, which of course needs to happen, but then what? What are you doing that for? And secondly, I think he would say, everyone, you have lost the train. You've gotten off the train as to what Zionism is intended to do. You have missed the message. Zionism, as Herzl articulated it, was the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, the ability of the Jewish people for self-determination, to be together, to unleash Jewish creativity, Jewish ingenuity, and just to live safely and securely. And he wrote about it in his books. He advocated for it. And those that are saying that the Zionism that Herzl envisioned is a colonial enterprise, it is attributed all the worst characteristics that one can impose upon a movement and a people, Herzl would say, you are not reading what I wrote. You are not understanding the purpose of Zionism. You are attributing to Zionism negative connotations. There is nothing negative in the concept. Maybe in its realization, it becomes difficult. It becomes, there's conflict, but what the conflict is not arising because of Zionism. It's because of others who have taken the word and defined it for us. You have to go, Herzl would say, go back and look what I wrote. To Israel and its supporters, he would also say, Zionism was not solely about getting a land for the Jewish people. He wrote it's about building a model society on that land. And he also envisioned that the new society, the Jewish state, state of Israel, was not exclusively for Jewish people. It was a place for Jewish people to actualize their self-determination. And so those in the on Israel's side who are talking about an environment which is which does not actualize the desires of other people consistent with the desires we have for ourselves, that too is not what Herzl envisioned. So he would probably say, world, get yourself some Herzls and read what I wrote about Zionism so you understand what it is. And I believe if people went back to the basics and not allow others to define Zionism for us, we could bit by bit have a little bit of a sea change and improve the situation.
So, a lot has happened since, Herzl was such an advocate for, Zionism. You mentioned The Old New Land, his utopian novel that was published, I believe, in 1902. It's now 2024. A lot of things have changed. There were a lot of thinkers, not just Herzl, who envisioned different types of Zionism, religious Zionism, muscular Judaism, which was a form of Zionism in a way. There's a few different strands of Zionism, sort of pre-state, pre-1948. Now we have about 76 years of an actual state, of a real sample size, if you will. And, I'm wondering, David, yeah, we can always romanticize about the great Zionist thinkers, notwithstanding Theodor Herzl, but we should also look at what Zionism has been over the last 76 years, sort of as a springboard for where it can or should not go. And I'm just curious, now moving forward, as opposed to looking back and saying, this is what Herzl said, this is what Max Nordau said, and all the other great Zionist thinkers, how do you think about Zionism in a post-October 7th world moving forward?
So it's important to understand that Zionism worked. It's one of the greatest social change movements of all time, perhaps the greatest. The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, our ancestral homeland, and I know that our detractors debate the ancestry and the indigeneity of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. Just pick up a Bible, it's unassailable. To be able to return to our ancestral homeland, and what a society that has been built there with the social structure. It's obviously not perfect with the medical developments, the scientific ingenuity. When there are world crises, earthquakes, tsunamis, who's the first to get up and go? Israeli people, as envisioned by Herzl in Alt Neuland. It's exactly what he thought about. And so there is so much that is great, and a fulfillment of the best dreams of the Zionist thinkers. At the same time, it is not perfect. No country is perfect. I live in Canada. I'm fortunate to live here, but my country here is not perfect. No country is perfect. And what Herzl said, and the Zionist thinkers, I guess, starting with Herzl, is to create that model society. The work is ongoing. And so I believe that if you take Zionism as the basic right of the Jewish people to be free and safe in their own homeland, and I know these days safety is a huge, huge question in Israel and around the world, but we're focusing on Israel. The Jewish people have a right to be safe. All people have the right to be safe. And when we say all people have the right to be safe, I mean all people. And what's missing in the Zionist thinking of some is that it's also the fulfillment of Zionism for the Jewish people to be safe in parallel with all other people who might have been affected by the Zionist enterprise. So specifically, in this case, Palestinian people. Now, this is not, to me, it's not a naive kind of magic wand and everything will be good. But I believe, as articulated by Herzl and most of the visionaries, the fulfillment of the Zionist dream is for everybody to live safely and peacefully in the historic land of Israel. And that would require many changes, many compromises. And I'm not naive enough to know that every time that we have tried to do that, it's blown up in Israel's face. Every time that we leave Gaza in 2005, southern Lebanon, it becomes, in whenever that was, it becomes a launch pad for terror and violence against us. But I believe that the ultimate fulfillment of the Zionist dream is to continue to hold that dream of a peaceful accommodation with our neighbors and understand that what might not have worked in 1948 when 7 Arab countries invaded us to try and destroy the nascent state of Israel, or in 1967, or in October 2023, that there's still a responsibility to try and figure out a better future for everyone. That, to me, is Zionism, because the state of Israel, as envisioned, was a Jewish state, but not intended to be exclusively a Jewish state. So to me, my greatest frustration as a proud Zionist, I love the state of Israel. I love the people of Israel. I've been there 50 times. My life is consumed by it. And you may reasonably ask, if you love it so much, why you're living in Canada. And that's a subject for a different conversation, of course. But I can love Israel as I do and be worried that it's making huge mistakes. And I can try and articulate a better vision for Israel in connection with its relationship with the Palestinians and all its detractors, recognizing how hard and impossible it looks right now, and still love Israel. And I believe I can do that by understanding.
I want to just ask you, because you mentioned mistakes that Israel is making. Can you just elaborate on what you mean by that?
The greatest mistake I believe Israel's making is not articulating what the purpose is of routing out Hamas, destroying Hamas, short of, by getting rid of Hamas, we will be safer. Now, reasonable people can differ whether Israel will indeed be safer, whether you can eliminate an ideology militarily, whether in the way that it is prosecuting the war in Gaza, it may win today and lose tomorrow. Will it be a victory with no survivors, in the sense on both sides? Is Israel creating a next generation of terrorists because of the manner in which it's, with good reason, like Israel needs to protect itself, there's no question, but is it creating greater problems? And so my major criticism, again, this is a Canadian living in Toronto, but who is an interested lover of Israel, is that Israel is not articulating to the world the purpose for which it is doing what it is doing in Gaza right now. And I believe if if the Israeli government would say that the baseline is we need to be protected, but we also are doing this to protect the valid aspirations of the Palestinian people so they can fashion for themselves a better future without worrying that they will in turn be destroyed by the remnants of Hamas if we don't get them all. And so to me, the greatest issue is, and it's been talked about since October 8th, what's the day after, or what's the day after? And I understand the internal political dynamics that the Prime Minister of Israel is subject to in not being able to articulate that because he's fearing for his own legacy and his own government and other factors. But standing here in Canada, Israel is appearing to want to eliminate Hamas, which it needs to do, but is not articulating what the purpose of it is and how that may fashion a better future for everyone. And my fear is that we are just dooming ourselves to a perpetual series of conflicts because we are not articulating, and probably not articulating because at this particular stage in history, the Israeli government is not in a position to wish to articulate a better tomorrow, not just for ourselves, but for everyone, as hard as that might be. And I believe that is a great failing. And that's the reason, not the only reason, a major reason why the relationship around the world for people, for Israel and its government and its people, which is unfair, is what it is.
So let me pick that apart. There's a few
Please.
things you said there. The first thing you said is that effectively it's Israel's job to articulate a vision for the Palestinians. I think that's a bit strange to say. I think it's the Palestinians' job to articulate their own vision for their own people and their own future state or lack thereof, depending on if they really want one or don't want one. That to me sounds a little bit weird. Number one. Number two, I think the goals of the war have been pretty clear. Israel needs to restore deterrence, security deterrence, and also return the hostages. I mean, when you talk about a day after, yeah, I agree. There's different scenarios, but the goals of the war have always been clear from day one and have been repeated almost on a daily basis in different interviews that Prime Minister Netanyahu has given, that different Israeli officials have given. Post-war Gaza, I mean, Gaza was effectively a military fortress with 5 million sort of civilians that knew what was going on, but apparently were okay with it or complicit or naive or ignorant. I mean, what do you do? I mean, I think, you live in Canada, David. I mean, I think well, maybe not the Canadians because they're quite, peaceful, overly peaceful. But the Americans, for example, to your southern border, we know what America would do in terms of a so-called post-war vision. I mean, the place would be flattened in 2 weeks.
But how is that I'm looking at it from Israel's interests. How is that in Israel's interest? So it's flattened. So the world.
No, I'm not saying that we should flatten it. I'm saying that ultimately the job of the Israeli government, regardless of who's the prime minister, is to return the hostages and ensure that Gaza does not serve as a viable threat to Israel, specifically southern Israel. Whatever happens after that, I agree that you have to have a plan, because if you accomplish those two goals, but then you essentially leave Gaza in ruins and don't have a plan for it, so to speak, then that creates a vacuum, and we know there's issues with that. But when you're fighting a war, I don't know how many other countries would have a concrete visionary plan in the midst of a war that Israel has been forced to fight with effectively two hands tied behind its back. So I understand sort of the hypothetical this sounds good in theory, but the reality is far more messier and convoluted. And I guess my question in that realm is, it seems to me that a lot of Jews have a um, sort of an idea, or an idea of what they think Zionism is or should be, as opposed to what the reality is. And it seems to me that many Jewish organizations around the world, instead of teaching Zionism as it is, they teach Zionism in the state of Israel as we all wish it could be in a perfect world, utopian society, this, that, and the other. But my concern is that when we have that cognitive dissonance of, here's what we hope Zionism would be versus here's what it actually is, and there's about 76 years of a sample size to demonstrate that, it seems to me that there's a lot of internal conflicts that people have, especially people that either have never lived in Israel, have never been to Israel, don't know much about the history of the country, both after the state was founded, but also before, going back to the 1800s. And it seems to me that a lot of people looking at this war, sort of in your shoes, you're saying, well, in theory, this is how it should be. But in reality, it's not that simple. And so I'm just curious what your reaction is to that cognitive dissonance that I tried to describe.
So if going back to Herzl, if you were in 1896 and you were Herzl and his supporters and he wrote the Judenstaat and envisioned a Jewish state, people thought he was crazy, impossible. It's an impossible dream. And it happened within 51 years. And I believe that the existence of the state of Israel in the first place, its proclamation, its coming to being, is more outlandish, more ridiculous of an idea than the possibility of Israel living in peace with its neighbors, ultimately. If the creation of Israel is less of a stretch to me than living in peace. And so I understand the dissonance, right? I understand the difficulty, but even the Allies in World War II were planning as to what to do with Germany and Japan once they won the war. That who would have? It looks impossible today to even think about having some kind of different future with the Palestinian people. But I would suggest that within 6 years of the Yom Kippur War, there was a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. Within 10 years of the end of World War II, Germany was a great supporter of Israel. Maybe it was 12 years, whatever. And look what it is now. Things can change. So absolutely, no one is saying it's easy. And nobody is saying there's a magic wand like Tinkerbell that you can make everything better. But Israel has the world's attention now. And it could articulate a vision which would include, and I'm not an expert in this, like UNRWA is a big issue. Got to dismantle it. Got to change the educational system, the incitement from grade kindergarten in Gaza and the West Bank. And it may take 20 years for a whole generations to go through an educational system that is different. But we are not articulating a possibility. So I believe whether it sounds strange to you that Israel should articulate, let the Palestinians articulate, the world works the way it is. The world is stacked against Israel. It just is. I recognize that. So knowing this is an issue out there, let's be smarter. It's not that you started it, you come up with the answer. What's in Israel's interest? I'm not saying any of this because I do feel for all people, but I believe ultimately people need to think what's in Israel's interest. And what's in Israel's interest is to find a situation where it's in everyone's interest to live better. The world's attention is on the situation. Israel has relationships because of interests, being the foe against Iran being one of them, where major Arab countries with significant resources might play a role in rebuilding a different future. And our ability, the greatest mistake, I believe, is not articulating an ultimate purpose for this, short of eliminating Hamas and returning the hostages, which are obviously valid objectives, but a vacuum has been left to the world to see what is, it's again not a political discussion, but there are voices in Israel and other places that articulate a much more disastrous future for Gaza. Some of Israel's politicians and others are not helpful in articulating this view. So if Israel, and then to me, there are internal dynamics which prevent the Israeli government from articulating a future view, because there are factions in that government, whether they're messianic, theological, or whatever they may be, that do not believe there should be a better future, because they believe it's the Jewish people first, paramount, and only. Like, first may be right, but never only, because ultimately it's not in our interest. I don't believe that if God promised the land to Abraham, that he also would have wanted a perpetual cycle of death and violence, because I believe we are doomed if we don't find a better way. And part of what we're seeing in the world, and part of the going back full circle to the change in the definition of Zionism by our detractors, is because we are not articulating the ultimate vision of a place where Jews can be safe and secure, and to do that living in peace and without having this be of mortal cost to other people. We have to, Jewish people, Zionism to me is the Jewish people in Israel are not going anywhere. This is our homeland. We built it, we bought it, notwithstanding what other people have said about it. We've sacrificed greatly for it. But we also have to recognize there are other people who have interests, and we can recognize that without being called anti-Semites. We can, I believe we should be able to say that there are some valid concerns expressed by the Palestinian people, not their leadership. Their leadership has taken them down a terrible road, but people, I believe, are people, just want to live. Most of them just want to live.
Let me jump in here, David, because it's a little long-winded, and I just want to start.
I understand. I'm a lawyer. I get paid by the word.
I just want to pick apart certain things because it's
Please.
important to get more specific. So, one can make the argument that if you look at the history of the state of Israel from 1948 to effectively 1977, it was run by sort of peace-loving, let's all find a way to live together with the Palestinians and our Arab neighbors, and that just didn't work. I mean, that's basically a matter of fact. It just didn't work. And that actually gave rise to the Likud party, which was started in the 1970s, won the general election, I believe it was 1977, Menachem Begin. And that approach, going from sort of more left-leaning policies to more right-leaning policies, was not perfect and also has some disadvantages. But it seems that the Israeli electorate since that time has becoming more and more what we can call right-wing. And that's a combination of the lived experience of Israelis. That's a combination of failed policies on the left. You know, the idea that, oh, we can all live together and, you know, there's good Palestinians and we're all just people. I mean, that's been proven completely false. All 7 billion people on this planet are not the same in terms of their culture and their education. And to think that we're all the same is, I mean, excuse my language, but nothing's short of foolish. We don't all want the same things. And if we do, it's not with the same nuances and circumstances that come with those quote unquote same things. And, you know, the idea that we need to articulate a vision now for Gaza when they started the war, whoever they is, you want to call it Hamas, you want to call it Hamas-led, you want to call it 3,000 Palestinians that invaded on October 7th. They started the war. We are now engaged in that war, meaning we, Israel. And to me, it's a very simple solution of what needs to happen in Gaza. You know, they had basically since 2005, when Israel withdrew completely from the Strip, we're talking about now almost 20 years of opportunity to build their own thing, state, city, whatever you want to call it. That was a complete failure. And whether you want to blame Hamas or Iran, or bottom line, that was a complete failure. So the idea now that we have to articulate a vision for a people that are effectively vying for our destruction, and if they themselves are not vying for it, they're at least complicit in it, is so beyond the reality of the present day, which is, unfortunately, I don't want this to happen, but unfortunately, it seems that Israel has to not just go into Gaza and take care of business, which is returning the hostages and defeating Hamas militarily and as a governing apparatus there, but it has to stay in Gaza and police the Palestinians because they cannot police themselves. Now, that's politically incorrect, and that's not what the West likes. But guess what? The West was never a friend to the Jews. And I'm talking about Canada, and I'm talking about the US, and I'm talking about Europe, and I'm talking about Australia, and I'm talking about South Africa and other places. And the Jews have been convinced, I think wrongly, that the West has the Jews' best interests. A lot of that was effectively just Holocaust guilt. And now, as the Holocaust is something like 80 years removed from the present day, it seems to me that the West has kind of moved on. And there's different trends, and you know, on both sides, the right and the left, not only for you know, from one lens. But it seems to me that if Israel is going to be moving forward, not looking back, moving forward, if Israel is going to be a truly safe place for Jews to live and to move there, to make Aliyah, to live for whatever their reasons may be, it seems to me that Israel has to do what's best for Israel, and the world will have to live with it. Or, of course, they can put Israel in a corner, which I don't think they'll do, but that's an option, right? I mean, sanctions and all these other things. And Israel have to decide what's better, to be put in a corner by the West, or to take care of business and do what is best for the Jewish state first and foremost, and not think about having a vision for a people that their whole identity is based, as you said at the beginning, not on the creation of something, but on the destruction of something else.
We both agree that Israel has to do what's in its best interests. We don't necessarily agree on what that is. I don't believe that Israel's best interest is to be a North Korea, where it's a pariah state in the world. I don't agree that there are not other alternatives to figure out how to deal with the situation in Gaza. I just don't agree, and it goes back to my first point. We need to have a leader with a different vision on all sides. This is, and I understand the concern and the risks, but the vision that you've articulated also comes with huge risks, including risks to our precious soldiers, who will be the ones who will have to monitor the situation that you described.
That's right. That's right.
There is nothing with no risk. And so it's a nuanced discussion. It's a difficult discussion. I'm not naive to say that it is easy, but I'm not naive to say that all people will live in peace, even in the United States. There's in Canada, well, less so in Canada, homegrown terrorists. There will always be fringe people. So how to marginalize the fringe people, how to have the Palestinian people say it's in my interests for you, Hamas, and your like, to leave us alone. Let us live. What is going to help motivate them to look after themselves? So nothing has worked so far, but I believe Im Tirtzu Ein So Agada, Herzl, if you will, it is no dream, is not restricted to the creation of the Jewish state. It is for anything that seems so difficult. We are a people of miracles. We create miracles. So we could spend our time, and we always have to protect ourselves and look after our interests. No question. I don't doubt that. I don't question that at all. But we also have to think bigger, think creatively, not be saddled by the suffering and the horror that we've experienced for so many years, but try and step back. And I know I'm in Canada, so take that with a grain of salt, to envision a better future. It's possible. We can't give up on that, because if we're just going to have precious Israeli soldiers monitoring Gaza with the remnants of Hamas and the new terrorists that will emerge from the people who have been displaced and families killed in Gaza as a result of the war that Hamas brought on its own people, we are doomed to continue this. We're not doomed as a country. We will always be a country. Israel is not going anywhere, but we have the opportunity to envision a better future. And so, again, from the beginning, who's a leader that will articulate a better future? It's not going to happen. A future that's articulated today may occur in 25 years from now, but we have to start that road, I believe, because there is danger, I believe, great danger in pursuing the path you've articulated. We may save in one place, but are we opening up greater danger somewhere else?
That's a fair
and
point.
I say that out of concern and fear.
Yeah, I want to ask you, you mentioned we need a better leader, something to that effect. Can you just be a little bit more specific about what you mean by that?
I could be flippant to say that anyone is better than the current prime minister. But again, I don't vote in the Israeli election. I believe that the situation, I'm articulating from a Canadian perspective, again, as a lover of Israel. The current prime minister has other interests in what is happening, whether it's to remediate his image from a failed strategy of funding Hamas, whether it's a couple days after October 7th, I had a terrible dream in the middle of the night, and everyone was having terrible dreams, I understand, and this is from the safety of here being in Canada. But I envisioned that Prime Minister Netanyahu would be one of those villains of Jewish history that people will be talking about 1,000 years from now. And I believe he is acting to remediate his legacy, all of the issues that preceded in terms of his own personal situation are also impacting him. And from a psychological point of view, being the person who was a leader of a country that suffered its greatest disaster, a horror of uncalculable proportions, is something that weighs on him. So he's looking for a way out in a a victory picture or whatever that might be. And the world sees that. So any other leader of Israel who might articulate the exact same views that he does would not give people around the world saying, well, of course he's saying that because he's trying to fix his image. And fix his image is an understatement by a multiple of a million.
Right. And I agree with that. I mean, it's hard not to agree with that. But I also think that you can say the same thing about Biden, Trudeau, Macron, and basically every other politician in the world that has used this war and other episodes not related to Israel for their own political benefit. War is always about politics. Every war. I mean, you cannot separate war from politics, politics from war. So the only thing I would add to that is if we're going to be critical of Netanyahu, which we absolutely should be, we should also be critical of all the other politicians that are also using this war and the Israeli-Palestinian issue for their own personal and political and domestic issues, and not for the quote unquote good of the Israelis and the Palestinians. I just think that's important to call out.
I think reasonable people can differ, right? I'm Canadian, I'm not American, but one might look at the Americans and say they're either great friends or selling Israel, doing Israel disservice. I believe that if you are a good friend, if I am a good friend, and I see somebody who I care deeply about doing something really bad, I believe I have the responsibility as a good friend to say, hold on. Right. And so people might perceive. So I can perceive the same. We can all see the same behaviors from the lens from which we come, but it's not unequivocally, to me, something for only internal political reasons. But I do, and I know that Israel's in an existential fight, and ultimately has to do what it's going to do and needs to do. But it needs to also understand it operates in a world, and the vision of the state of Israel, as I said previously, is not a pariah state of like North Korea. It's right. The unleashing of Jewish ingenuity to benefit the world cannot be accomplished if we're stuck in the corner all alone. Nor do I believe can we thrive and succeed Israel as a society if that's the case. So we're damned if we do and damned if we don't, and we have to figure out, weighing all these factors, what's in Israel's best interests. And I believe that, and something that we haven't said, somebody can express a view of what is Israel's best interests without being perceived to be a Hamas supporter, without being perceived to be an anti-Semite, self-hating Jew, a weak, woke liberal, all of which I have been called. And I think a discussion such as this, where we clearly don't agree but can have a very good discussion, is important to have. We need to, and there are differences that people can envision about what's in Israel's best interests.
That's right. And I think
that to me is the key. That's Zionism. How do we figure out what's in Israel's best interest? We may not agree of it, but we have to agree that Israel must live, must thrive, and it has every right to do so.
Correct. And I think the people that are most best positioned to decide what is in Israel's best interests are the people that live in Israel. It's fine for people around the world to have opinions about the Israeli government, to have opinions about Israeli society and Israeli culture. But at the end of the day, Israel is a democratic state. Netanyahu is and has been a democratically elected prime minister. I personally never voted for him, and probably never will. But, it seems to me that there's a lot of, for the sake of this discussion, Jews around the world that are projecting their own stuff, we can call it, on Israel and saying Israel should be this, Israel should be that, Israel should do this, Israel should do that, without the reality of what, where Israel lives, what has happened over the last 100 years, both prior to the founding of the state and certainly thereafter. And so I'm wondering, from somebody like you, who's obviously incredibly passionate about Israeli politics. I mean, you're a Jew. You could easily make Aliyah. I don't know if you hold Israeli citizenship, but if not, the argument is always made. I wouldn't be the first to make it. If Jews are so passionate, diaspora Jews are so passionate about Israeli politics, why not make Aliyah? It doesn't mean you have to live in Israel, as I think and go and vote in the elections.
So I just want to respond to a generalization. There may be some people out in the world who express views on Israel without knowing the history, without caring, without knowing the background. But there are many who know very well the history and are doing it out of a love and what their view is of the best interests of Israel. So we all run the risk of generalizing. If someone is critical, to say, well, they don't know anything about it, they don't live here, they don't care, they're appeasing some other interest. And I would also say that those who have a different views here are also articulating views expressed by Israelis. So Israel is a democracy. So the views that I have expressed or believe are not unique to Canadian Herzl collectors, but it is consistent with other views expressed in Israel. And so we find extreme reactions to people here who express the same views that are expressed in Israel. In terms of why don't I come to and make Aliyah, it's an excellent question, and that's something that I need to work through myself in my own personal situation. But what we are seeing post October 7th is that we, Jews in Israel and Jews around the world, we are intricately connected. Something that many of us knew all the time, but for many, many people are learning for the first time, that the amount of care and concern for Israel that October 7th has lit is unparalleled in my lifetime. I was 6 years old in 1967, so maybe it was the same around then. But we are also seeing that politics and military strategy and other dynamics that unfold in Israel have an impact on the Jewish people around the world. We are in this together. So, of course, I don't vote in Israel's elections, but I am impacted, I care, and I have every right to express a view on Israel for people to listen to at this end, to try and garner support for Israel, to help the cause of Israel. And it may not be consistent with the views expressed by the Israeli government. And there are many, many people in Israel who are also critical of the Israeli government. So I think it's fair game. It's everything is nuanced. What's lost at this particular time is nuance. I can criticize Israel out of love, and that's not the same as criticizing Israel out of hate. And we have to, there are haters out there. There are people who know nothing. There are people who are superimposing on Israel the issue of the social dynamic of the treatment of the Black population in America starting in the 1600s, and somehow layering that on Israel, and Jews are white and Hamas is brown, and all kinds of stuff that is just not relevant, and that needs to be called out. But that's not the same as people who care about Israel and are voicing views because they want to help.
Right. But David, I think you would agree with me that if you were sitting alongside another Canadian right now, and we were talking about the Canadian government, and I was sharing whatever views I have about the Canadian government, and then there's an election next year and we're both Canadian citizens and you go vote and I don't. I mean, I think you would agree that the person that offers their opinion or critique and then doesn't really do anything about it other than talking about it is unproductive. That's the situation we have today, and we've had for the last 75 plus years, where a lot of Jews have opinions. I totally agree with you. You're entitled to your opinion. Your opinion is not something that can't be found in Israel amongst Israelis. The question here is not a question of are you entitled or are you not entitled to your opinions, and do those opinions align with certain Israelis? The question is, if Jews are so intertwined, as you say, with Israel and Israel with the Jews around the world, and we can debate why that is, if it's more anti-Semitism, if it's Zionism, if it's other things. But if that's the bottom line, then it seems to me that all the Jews who can make Aliyah, meaning every Jew in the world that doesn't have a criminal record or a public health threat, all Jews can make Aliyah. That does not require anyone to actually live in Israel or stay in Israel for a certain period of time. And it does, once you get your Israeli ID card, immediately give you the right to vote in Israeli elections. So it seems to me that there's a growing disconnection between people who say that they love Israel or care about Israel or are worried about Israel, but don't actually take advantage of what I think most people would agree is the greatest right, which is the right to vote.
So let me answer two things. My father at 96 years old just made Aliyah. He's a veteran of the War of Independence, and this was the fulfillment of his dream at 96 to be an Israeli citizen. And one of the requirements to be an Israeli citizen is to commit to live in Israel for at least 6 months a year. So just as a technical point, but more important, one can serve Israel in different ways, and so perhaps you may not be seeing how those of us who care about Israel are serving in terms of writing to our politicians, demonstrations in Washington, in Ottawa, to protesting. We're asked by Israeli organizations to help support the relief efforts in the South, making investments, help the economy, come and visit, meet the people. So I'm not saying that that's equivalent to living in Israel, but to say that there is only one way to really demonstrate support for Israel is to become an Israeli citizen and fly in to vote in an election, is, assuming that was possible, is a way, but it's not the only way. And Israel needs people around the world to support it, to call our governments when they're going on the wrong path. In Canada, to protest the behavior of the government, for those who feel that the Canadian government, who are not doing what they think is best for Israel, and when an election comes, choose, if they see fit, a government that might do something different vis-a-vis the relationship with Israel. There are many, many ways to serve. And so I don't want listeners, your many listeners, to think that this is just talk. Talk is, what Herzl teaches us is talk is irrelevant. It's action, it's doing. Herzl didn't envision Zionism, but he was the first person to go about and make it happen. So me talking to you is great, and I'm enjoying the conversation, but I hope that it inspires those of us who are living outside of Israel to do whatever they can. Israel needs our help, and the help will be different, and we'll perceive it differently. and we may not agree on a strategy, a political strategy, a military strategy, and believe it, I understand that. But all of us, what is Zionism? Zionism to me is the belief of people that we need a state of Israel, we're entitled to it, and we have to help it survive and thrive and get through this difficult, dark time and envision a better future. I always wear, I wear two bracelets these days, but usually this blue bracelet, which is Herzl, quote, if you will it, it is not a dream. And a quote from Martin Luther King, I have a dream. We can never give up the dream of a better future. A future, the visionaries of Zionism, all leaders of Israel, from David Ben-Gurion through Menachem Begin, through anyone, and I dare say even Netanyahu, ideally would want Israel to live in peace. It's hard. It seems so bleak right now, that possibility, but we cannot live, or we cannot give up the dream. I just will refuse to give up the dream. And you may say that I'm naive. You may say that I don't understand the hatred of our enemies. I do, but I believe ultimately that we have no choice but to find a better way.